Recently on TwinCam, we've been looking at some quite exotic cars, and that's very unlike me. But today is the day that all comes crashing back down to earth, because we're looking at something from my childhood, the ubiquitous little Citroën Saxo. And is this a VTR or even a VTS? No, of course not. It's a 1.1, the kind you might have learned to drive in, and a car that, due to its history, is already becoming a modern classic icon of the late 90s and early 2000s. The Saxo was launched in 1996 as Citroën's replacement for the little 10-year-old AX, and from no angle was it controversial, unusual or attention-seeking. Instead, it was a thoroughly decent small car that, unexpectedly, went on to become the centre of an entire culture in the UK. We'll start to understand why in a bit, but in the real world, as I've just said, there was nothing different about the Saxo. And that is our first talking point, because being normal and not doing something different isn't something that comes naturally to cars with chevrons on the front. Thanks to Citroën being Citroën, the Saxo, for its very simplicity, was viewed with a bit of scepticism. For decades up to the launch of the larger Escort and Golf-sized ZX in 1991, Citroëns were characterised by their rejection of design and engineering standards, always approaching every part of car design in a totally different manner to their peers. Even after Peugeot bought the company in 1974, they kept making cool and wacky designs like the BX. But with survival at stake and an owner willing to share, Citroën's engineering oddness had to be watered down. The ZX was the first modern Citroën to be utterly conventional in both design and engineering, aiming itself squarely at the Volkswagen Golf, and the Saxo was just more of the same. In fact, it wasn't even a brand new car, as for all intents and purposes, it's merely a restyled and rebadged Peugeot 106, a car launched 6 years before in 1990. The old Citroën AX may have been conventional from an engineering standpoint, but it looked different, made great use of plastic to save weight, and was built in a way that ignored conventional wisdom on how to attract people to buying a car. The AX embraced milk tray build quality and ridiculously thin panels, all for the sake of saving weight, and it paid off by making the AX an absolute riot. The obsession with weight is what made the AX a Citroën, but the Saxo was given nothing at all to separate it from its Peugeot cousin. However, if we care so much about lineage, we need to look at the bigger picture. The AX was first shown to the world in 1986 and was an all-new car, so though it used Peugeot-derived engines and had Peugeot influences, it was a new Citroën, with no direct Peugeot platform beneath. When Peugeot themselves wanted to try and replace the 205, the obvious place to turn was the Citroën AX. So if it does matter so much, then the Saxo is a badge-engineered 106, which itself is a modified AX. But even with a glance at the Saxo, you can recognise the 106 heritage. The general silhouette and overhangs are identical, and though every panel is actually different, the shape of the rear end, for example, is lifted straight from the 106. Look at where the rear lamps and badges sit. Then there are the doors. Though this is a 5-door, the 3-door cars share the flap for opening the doors with the facelift 106, and though less recognisable, the 5 doors' profile and handles are, again, identical. But this isn't to say I think the Saxo is useless, because despite very clearly being based on the Peugeot, the Citroëns have a slightly different character. There may have been a 106 GTI, but the hot Saxos have a more dynamic, rounded, modern, sporty look to them. And the basic ones, like this, have a more feminine style to them. It's friendlier than the 106, and the facelift, which this car is an example of, only adds to those elements. It's a good looking little car. Minimal work for just a different niche to entice a few more buyers. And though I think the 106 was the better looking car, a lot of people disagreed with me. As I've alluded to, the Saxo rather unexpectedly went on to become one of Britain's favourite small cars. A huge departure from older Citroëns, which people shied away from due to their complications. The Saxo was always a known quantity. The engines are the easiest place to see what I mean, because under here is the trusty old TU 4-cylinder. It's single overhead cam, 8 valves, and had been around for 10 years before the Saxo was launched. It was used in virtually everything Peugeot Citroën for over 20 years. So that means it's dependable, well proven, and modifiable. But in this car we find a little TU1, so 1124cc and about 60 brake horsepower, and it's a really sweet little thing. It makes a great noise and it's very, very smooth. It's refined and it's quiet. And you know what, it's more quiet than a lot of more modern little 4-cylinder engines. I really, really like it. And it's not quick though. It's really not quick. 60 horsepower doesn't feel as powerful as a 60 horsepower in my Metro, let's put it that way. Nowhere near. And also, it's not that happy to rev. It's got quite a lot of torque to it, it feels like, but it's all 2000 RPM, and it only revs to just over 6, so it's really not the most willing power unit in the world. But let's just bomb back where we've been. Now it does seem to get a little bit thrashy up at the top end, you know, over 4,000 revs it does get thrashy, but you know, below that it's really smooth and refined. It's a nice little engine this. I don't think it's a Rover K series, it's not that good, but it is a nice little thing. And you can get up speed easily enough. But also available was a 1 litre 50 horsepower power unit, a 1400, a 1500 diesel and 3 1600s, topped by the 120 horsepower 16 valve Saxo VTS. But again, there's nothing different about that, because that's about the same power output as a 106 GTI. Suspension. If there's one thing a small French car from the 90s can do, it's go round corners. And when it was launched, the 106 was considered the finest handling small car you could buy. Pretty good starting point for the Saxo then. The front end sits on a set of McPherson struts, and the rear is a good old torsion beam. All the standard recipe for a small car, even today. And that's for good reason. Peugeot and Citroën always used this same system, whilst most manufacturers experimented at least a couple of times with something different. But PSA knew. For 20 years they comfortably produced some of the best handling small cars. Not just the 106 and Saxo, but also the 205, AX and 306. You might think that, having discussed the lack of focus on weight of the AX, that the Saxo might be a bit lardy in comparison. But it isn't, because these things are still only 800 and something kilograms, so they're still really, really lightweight. And God, you can feel it. Because although the steering is a bit damped out because, you know, power steering, and of course the driving position, you sit very high, it's so easily hustled, this car. It loves to just kind of lollop about country lanes, and it bounces a little bit. But turning is lovely, lovely and sharp. And I haven't driven it on the limit, because of course I haven't. I've only got it for a short amount of time, but it feels so willing. I really didn't have that much time to drive this little thing, only 10 minutes. So this isn't at all my usual comprehensive road test. But in that time I found that the chassis feels very neutral. It doesn't seem as though it would fall into understeer, but that if you provoked it, it may go into a little oversteer. The platform feels very alive, just as I expected it to actually. Though the steering feel doesn't exactly complement it, though that's to be expected in a car of this age. What I did note is that it appears to ride very well too, and I suppose the closest competitor I can directly compare it to is the Corsa C I drove a while ago. And despite that car being a generation more modern, it's less comfortable, less communicative, and the understeer is dangerously unpredictable. I'd really like to have taken this one on a longer drive, because I could already tell I was going to love it. So the style is right, and the engine and chassis are excellent, but the interior does bring up a few more questions. But the interior is very, very hit and miss. And it seems a little bit strange when I actually evaluate something like this, because it's as if it's been designed very, very well and then productionised horrendously. Someone deserved to lose their job at Citroën for this, but whoever designed it deserved a promotion. That's the kind of thing. Because the dashboard is really good looking. It's all swoopy and curvaceous, and it all flows into each other, and it also flows away from you at the bottom. It just is a lovely looking dashboard, and you can't quite capture the way it is in 2D photography. You need to really see it in person to see it kind of pop. Now this rather feminine dashboard design is something that was very, very popular in the 1990s, with the Ford cab being the best example of it because it was so wacky. But in the Saxo, it's very elegant, it's simplified, and it's just about right in terms of design. It has everything you kind of need with a little bit of design flair, but not over the top. I really, really like it. However, when it came to actually productionising it, it seems someone decided that flair can just go in the bin, because it's all just black and bland, and the rest of the interior is just grey and pretty boring, really. It does have a slightly jazzy pattern on the seats, but it's not that great, really. And the tone of this interior could very easily have been brought up by just some bright plastic finishes around the fascia, or a brighter coloured dials or something like that. That's all it needed to really bring it up and make you get in the car and kind of think, wow. But instead they didn't. It's all just bland, and that's such a shame, because they had an opportunity to do something cool here and they threw it away completely. And a similar kind of thing can be said for the driving position, because again, whoever fundamentally designed this did a really good job, because the steering wheel is bolt in front of me, perfect position. The pedals are bolt in front of me, perfect position. But the seats provide very, very little support. They feel very cheap. They're moving as I move around in them. I mean, look at how squishy that is. It's just not a quality item. And whoever positioned these seats has put them way up in the gods. So I'm only 5'9", but I only have that much headroom, which is a bit ridiculous. And so I'm sitting up in the gods here. It's ridiculously high. When I first got in this car this morning, I was looking around for a lever to adjust the seat down. I couldn't believe that someone at PSA decided that this was a suitable driving position. It's ridiculous. So we have the correct recipe of controls that are all in line with you and very, very perfect, offset by someone who positioned a seat in a stupid place. And again, the productionization of this dashboard comes into that, because although the pedals are in front of you, they're very compact in the pedal box. So I can't move my feet without bumping into the dashboard. It's just compromised in a way you wouldn't expect it to be. And I think that's a shame. Holistically, all I've actually concluded today is that the 106 is a cleaner, sharper looking and better designed car. And while the Saxo certainly has its place, I can't see myself ever choosing one over the Peugeot. So in light of all this, why did the Saxo become the darling of the car-loving youth 20 odd years ago? Why wasn't the 106 the car to be max powered to hell and back? Well, the answer is simple. Money. It's regularly said that in Britain in the 1990s, the hot hatch very nearly died. In reality, that's rubbish, as we had some great hot hatches like the Fiesta RS Turbo, the Escort Cosworth, the 220 Turbo, the Clio Williams and the 306 GTI. But the problem was cost. The explosion in hot hatches in the 80s and all the illicit activity involving them caused insurance prices to rocket, and the vast majority were priced out of owning any kind of GTI. But then along came Citroën with the Saxo. At the time, lease and finance deals were nowhere near as forthcoming as they are today, leading most young people into driving some kind of cheap elderly 1-litre shopping trolley. But Citroën were offering very affordable deals on brand new Saxos. But the key wasn't getting into a car, it's that they were offering a year's free insurance. Suddenly, the Saxo became every young person's go-to car. A total shock from a car which, at its launch, was totally unremarkable. But the Saxo kick-started an entire culture of its own, carrying on from that of XR2s in the 80s and feeding today into the Fiesta STs. But it's easy to get lost in the world of the Saxo VTS, because most of the cars that ended up going through that system were cars like this. Cheaper, more parent-pleasing, less antisocial Saxos. Of course, this insurance deal was only available on brand new cars, which priced out a lot of young people. But I'm led to believe that a lot of approved used Saxos were sold with massively discounted insurance. And these two groups came together to create a totally new culture of modifying fast Saxos. It was the first time in the best part of a decade that an 18-year-old could dream of having a hot hatch. And even with a used 1.1 without the offer of free insurance, all the performance or tasteless appearance mods you could think of were on the shelves and became necessary Christmas list fodder for an 18-year-old in 2001. The scheme didn't always work, as a lot of people were taken in by the offer and ended up paying extortionate prices on silly finance deals, but it meant that Saxos flew off the forecourts in the UK. So much so that the 106 started being offered with free insurance too. But these cars were never topping the sales charts. That was the job of the Fiesta, that just seemed to ride the wave of having a blue oval on the front, and the revival in their fortunes following the launch of the Focus in '98. But the Saxo got the recipe and marketing spot on. They appealed to everyone they needed to. They were dependable, and because they were accessible, the community and aftermarket support just naturally rose. Take note, modern car manufacturers. The VTR and VTS are already commanding serious premiums, but even the basic ones like this aren't readily available for pennies anymore. This is one of the up-and-coming classic cars. And on that note, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'm forever indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, so if you'd like to support me that way, then follow the link in the description. And I'll have more videos coming along soon.